Uh, First of all, I'd like to say I'm very excited to be here in Indonesia. So, as an American, I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. And in America, when you ask somebody growing up where's paradise, they always think of Hawaii, right? That's our paradise in America. But as you look at the national anthem and the slides for Indonesia Raya going across the screen, you realize Indonesia is like Hawaii on steroids with a much deeper culture, much more diverse and friendly people, and better food. So I spend a lot of time keeping my senior management out of Indonesia so that they don't figure out that I'm living in paradise. It is very exciting to be here in Indonesia, and Indonesia continues to become more and more of an important player on the world scale. As we all know, it's the largest economy in Southeast Asia, and Indonesians get frustrated with 5% a year growth. Well, I think in most countries in the world, that's a growth rate that people would be very enviable about, even though here in Indonesia, people want to get back up over 7. So we see, though, growth is beginning to gain footing and traction continuing. And then, I think with the Jokowi administration, as we heard during the panel discussion, very impressive strides in improving the investment climate here in Indonesia. So first of all, increased transparency and real focus on combating corruption, and some of the terrific appointments made by the Jokowi administration in that regard are to be lauded. Excellent appointments of people in key positions, and we see these dynamic leaders very focused on improving efficiency in the government and improving access to markets to drive growth. We see a lot of effort in streamlining permitting process, which is very important in our line of work, reducing the number of permits. And then in particular, one of the things investors always look for is not just, the investment climate, but also what's the impairments to investment. And frankly speaking, in Indonesia, one of the big impairments to investments over the years has always been concern about tax policy. So as a multinational company that's fully tax compliant and we pay our taxes, sometimes it did feel like we were being a target because with a country that's struggling with tax compliance, maybe me and some of our peer companies become targets for additional tax assessments, some very creative tax assessments. But with Ibu Sri Mulyani coming on, I think the tremendous confidence that we have in her leadership and her capability and her assurances that good compliant companies are going to be welcome in Indonesia and not targeted for additional assessments, really fantastic. And we're seeing that backed up in actions, not just in words. So that's fantastic. And then here in the energy sector, we see there's been a tremendous courage by the president when he came in to remove subsidies, fuel subsidies, and shore up the state budget. And that's really helped the country continue to develop, and also to the envy of many countries in the world, keeping the annual state budget deficit to within 3% of gross domestic product. That's, again, the envy of many, many countries in the world. So there are many things in Indonesia that are going very, very well, and certainly the current administration and the DPR needs to be applauded for these great steps forward. But behind these successes, as we heard earlier today, there are some areas of concern. And they're really around how is Indonesia going to continue to grow most effectively to benefit the most people. So behind these great signs, we see that domestic energy consumption, as you saw in the charts earlier today, continues to really increase. It's doubled over the past 15 years, but energy production continues to fall. Overall production has fallen by over 10%, and we continue to see oil production decline to levels that haven't been seen in Indonesia since the 1960s. When you look forward, as you saw with some of the charts earlier, it's expected that Indonesia's oil production will be half of today's levels, struggling to stay above 400,000 barrels a day. And so that's certainly very concerning. And then on the natural gas side, while that's in much better condition, in order to maintain current production rates and see growth, there's going to have to be significant investment and significant projects progress. So we know Indonesia is going to have an insatiable appetite for energy demand, and that's really driven by the growth of this economy and the aspirations of over 260 million people to live a better life. And that's why we're here as a multinational IOC to help provide that energy. But today, we live in a world where imports are relatively cheap, right? It's maybe cheaper to import oil or natural gas or LNG than to do your own projects. And that maybe will lull us here in Indonesia into a false sense of security. But we shouldn't be fooled by this false sense of security, because we've all seen this movie before many, many times. We know what's going to happen. When we have low commodity prices over a long period of time, as we see around the world, a tremendous reduction in investment in the oil and gas industry, reduction in the number of rigs working around the world. And while there is tremendous supply available out there today, in a few years we know this is going to come back into balance, as it always does. And while the U.S. shale gas revolution and the U.S. shale oil revolution will temper the potential price shocks, we know that all it takes is a tightening of supply and demand coupled with some geopolitical issue, and we're going to have price spikes that we've seen in the past. So helping Indonesia meet its energy needs and be prepared for the future requires consistent investment. And investment in our industry, as we all know in this room, is a long-term proposition. We know there are tremendous risks. We know tremendous capital is required to produce oil and gas assets. And in order to do this, we need to all work together with governments, companies, state-owned enterprises to achieve the shared goal of making sure we have the energy available to meet Indonesia's growth needs. You know, at the end of the day, there's only one reason that IOCs like ExxonMobil are here in country, and that's to meet that need and do it at the lowest cost. And that's our winning proposition. You know, we're fortunate here in Indonesia to have the Ban Europe project started up. That's Indonesia's largest oil investment in over 6 decades. And we're very fortunate to have excellent partnership with Pertamina and with 4 local company BUMDs. And that's allowed us to bring the project online and produce over 200,000 barrels a day, which, as you heard from Pak Alam, is 25% of current production in the country. And we've been able to grow that production from our original plan of 165,000 barrels a day to over 200,000 barrels a day with no additional capital investment, through great partnership with Pertamina and creative debottlenecking engineering. So we're very happy with the performance we see at a very low cost. So we know that's very important for the state budget and cost recovery budget. So every barrel produced is $2.40 production cost. That's the lowest in Indonesia and one of the lowest in the world. So we're very proud of being able to do that safely and reliably. But when we look at some of the challenges, well, it sounds great at the end. We have to remember that Ban Europe was discovered in 2001, and it took over 15 years to get the full project online. So we don't have 15 years to find the next Ban Europe and get it online in Indonesia and see those benefits. So we have to work together to stimulate exploration and ensure that Indonesia can win the foreign investment that's going to be required to make sure resources are available to continue to grow the Indonesian economy. Where will the next Ban Europe come from, and how will Indonesia attract the investment and capital that's required for such a world-class development? You know, as we talked about during the panel discussion, investors prioritize their investments across the entire globe now. And for companies with available capital, while prices may be low, opportunities right now are plentiful. If you have money to invest, there's companies to be bought and assets to access around the world that weren't there in higher price times. So to compete for capital, I think our IOC investors are really looking for three things, and they're easy to say but very difficult to do. But the first is globally competitive fiscal terms that recognize the needs of the company to make the investment while rewarding the government. So we're only successful if we make some money while the government makes a whole lot more. But we need those terms in place to allow that initial investment. And those terms need to be durable. They need to last over the decades of the investment. The second thing is a stable business environment with a streamlined bureaucracy. And that's where it's really good to see some of the recent initiatives out of ESDM, streamlining the upstream bureaucracy and helping make more efficient investments. Third, we need a clear, predictable, and consistent regulatory process. Again, over decades, because that's the timeline that massive upstream investments function over. So while it's exciting to see the current efforts to streamline the investment climate, induce investment in Indonesia, make Indonesia a really attractive place to invest, and see some really impressive results, there are still some long-standing issues we need to continue to work together to resolve. So I just want to close by re-emphasizing Indonesia is a hugely important market in the world. It's hugely important to ExxonMobil, and we're fully committed to be here in Indonesia for the long term. We've been here 120 years. We're going to be here many, many years longer. We'd like to provide Indonesia's energy from within. If we have to bring it from outside and import it and help Indonesia continue to grow, we'll do whatever it takes to make Indonesia competitive now and into the future. But I think by working together, we can get back to stimulating the upstream oil and gas industry and continue to meet Indonesia's growing energy needs. Thank you very much.
A round of